The morning air carried a faint saltiness, even in the city, as Jacob finished his coffee and stared out of the window at the quiet suburban street. The silence was deceptive, masking the storm brewing inside him. His wife, Sarah, had left earlier that week, citing maintenance at their beach house. Jacob first dismissed his doubts. After all, their marriage wasn't perfect, but they had always been honest with each other, or so he thought. Yet, when Sarah's tone grew strained every time he asked about the trip, and when she was unusually vague about her return, his gut instinct told him otherwise. That afternoon, Jacob's phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from their neighbor at the beach house, Miss Garrison. The older woman was the kind who noticed everything but rarely intruded. Today, however, she sent Jacob a photo. The image was innocuous at first glance, Sarah on the beach, a glass of wine in her hand, laughing. But it wasn't her joy that caught Jacob's attention, it was the man sitting beside her. Logan. A name Jacob had heard before. A name Sarah had slipped into conversations with forced nonchalance. His chest tightened as he stared at the picture. This wasn't maintenance. By the time the evening rolled around, Jacob had reviewed every detail of the image. The timestamp confirmed it was recent. Sarah had lied. The revelation struck like a cold wave, leaving him with a swirling mix of anger, humiliation, and resolve. But Jacob wasn't the type to lash out blindly. If Sarah thought she could carry on this charade without consequences, she underestimated him. Jacob spent the next few hours planning meticulously. He made calls to cancel Sarah's access to their shared bank accounts and contacted a locksmith near the beach house. He even reserved a last-minute stay at a nearby hotel under an alias. He wanted to ensure Sarah and Logan were unprepared for what was coming. The final step was printing the photograph. He placed it in an envelope alongside another, a candid of their wedding day. The contrast between the two images stung, but it also fueled his determination. He wasn't going to let this betrayal fester in silence. As Jacob packed a bag, his mind wandered to the memories he and Sarah had made at the beach house. It was supposed to be their sanctuary, a place where the world couldn't touch them. That she had chosen this spot to betray him felt like a deliberate twist of the knife. Before leaving, he paused at the mirror. His reflection stared back, calm, composed, but with eyes sharp steel. This wasn't about vengeance for vengeance sake. It was reclaiming his dignity, and ensuring they both understood the cost of deceit. The drive to the beach house was long, the night pressing in around him like a suffocating shroud. Jacob kept the windows down, letting the salty air bite at his face. Every mile brought him closer to the confrontation he dreaded, but knew was necessary. As he turned onto the winding road leading to the beachfront property, Jacob's thoughts sharpened. The next few hours would test his restraint, his resolve, and his ability to stand firm in the face of betrayal. Tonight, the idyllic beach house would be the setting for a reckoning Sarah would never forget. Jacob arrived at the beach house just as the moonlight danced on the waves. The scene was serene, almost mocking in its perfection. The house, their sanctuary, stood tall against the backdrop of crashing waves, a beacon of their shared dreams, or so he once thought. Tonight, it was the stage for an act of betrayal. He parked his car quietly a short distance away, his heart pounding with every step toward the house. The porch light was on, spilling a golden glow onto the wooden steps. A familiar warmth crept up his spine, not from nostalgia, but from the growing anger that simmered beneath his calm exterior. As Jacob approached, faint laughter drifted from the deck. It wasn't Sarah's usual laugh, the one that had charmed him all those years ago. It was lighter, freer, as though she had shed the weight of their shared history. And then there was another laugh. Logan's. Deep, confident and casual, like he belonged there. Jacob slipped around the side of the house, his footsteps muffled by the soft sand. Through the sheer curtains of the living room, he could make out Sarah and Logan. They were seated on the couch, a bottle of wine open between them. Logan leaned in, his hand resting on Sarah's knee as she playfully swatted it away. Jacob's stomach churned. This was no misunderstanding. There was no room for Sarah's excuses now. Instead of barging in, Jacob circled to the back of the house, where the sliding glass doors led into the kitchen. His key no longer worked, confirming that Sarah had changed the locks, as if trying to shut him out entirely. No matter. He had anticipated this and brought along a spare tool, a small crowbar. With a few calculated movements, the lock yielded. He stepped into the kitchen, the familiar smell of the house mingling with the faint aroma of roasted garlic. They had been cooking. His fists clenched. Jacob walked to the counter and saw 2 plates, neatly set. Candles were lit, their wax pooling lazily on the polished wood. There was something surreal about it, seeing such intimacy in a space that had always been theirs. He took a deep breath, forcing his emotions into check. This confrontation would be about control and exposure, not raw anger. He could hear them speaking now, though the words were muffled. Logan was talking about work, bragging about some deal he had landed. Sarah chimed in, her voice filled with admiration that Jacob hadn't heard in years. He felt a pang of resentment. Was this what she wanted? Someone who could charm her with surface-level charisma? He moved quietly into the hallway, just close enough to hear their conversation. "I still can't believe you got away with this," Logan said with a chuckle. Sarah sighed, her tone light. "Jacob has no idea. He's so busy with his work, I doubt he even notices when I'm gone. And honestly, he's never going to find out. He trusts me too much." Those words, casually delivered, felt like daggers to Jacob's chest. Trust. She had weaponized his trust against him, turning it into a shield for her lies. Jacob's resolve solidified. He moved back to the kitchen, retrieved the envelope with the photographs, and placed it deliberately on the center of the dining table. He arranged it so it would be impossible to miss. Then he stepped back, taking a long look around the room that had once been a haven for their family. Before stepping outside, he reached into his pocket and retrieved the second envelope. The one contained the locksmith's bill and a note revoking her access to their shared accounts. He placed it beside the photos. Satisfied, Jacob slipped out the way he came, retreating to the shadows just beyond the deck. He waited there, watching the scene unfold through the glass doors. When Sarah and Logan eventually wandered into the kitchen, their laughter abruptly ceased. Logan was the first to see the envelope, frowning as he held it up. Sarah's face fell as she recognized the handwriting. "What's this?" Logan asked. Sarah's hand trembled as she took the envelope, her eyes darting toward the shadows beyond the glass doors. Jacob smiled grimly. She knew he was there, somewhere, watching. Logan peered over her shoulder as she pulled out the photos. Her gasp was audible even from Jacob's vantage point. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Logan's bravado faltered as he scanned the images. "You said he'd never find out," he muttered, his voice tinged with unease. From the shadows, Jacob felt no satisfaction, only the quiet weight of a truth revealed. This was only the beginning. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of Jacob's evidence sinking in. Sarah's eyes darted between the photos and Jacob, her mind racing for an excuse, a denial, anything to defuse the situation. But the proof was undeniable. "Jacob, please let me explain," Sarah began, her voice trembling. "Explain what?" Jacob shot back, his tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. "That you lied to me? That you turned our sanctuary into a love nest for him?" He gestured toward Logan, who looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Logan, sensing the growing hostility, attempted to assert himself. "Look, man, I didn't know." "Don't speak," Jacob said, his voice cold. "You don't get to justify." Logan's face flushed red, but he said nothing further. Sarah stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Jacob, I made a mistake." "Ugh, a mistake?" Jacob barked, standing abruptly. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door or overcooking dinner. This is betrayal." He paced the room, the anguish in his movements contrasting with his otherwise calm demeanor. "Do you have any idea what this place meant to me? To us?" he asked, gesturing around the room. "We built this house together, Sarah. Every nail, every coat of paint. This was supposed to be ours." Sarah flinched at his words, tears forming in her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. Jacob stopped pacing and faced her. "Didn't mean to hurt me? You planned this. You lied, manipulated, and laughed with him in our house." He turned to Logan. "And you? You thought you could waltz in here and take what's mine?" Logan, clearly uncomfortable, muttered, "Look, man, I think it's best if I just leave." Jacob's laugh was hollow. "Oh, you're leaving, all right, but not before you hear this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a document. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. Sarah, I've revoked your access to our accounts. The locks on this house are being changed as we speak. And as for you," he fixed his gaze on Logan, "if I so much as see your car near this property again, I'll make sure the police are involved." Logan blanched, his bravado completely shattered. He looked to Sarah for support, but she had none to offer. "Jacob, please," Sarah pleaded, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake. I love you. Jacob raised a hand to stop her. Don't insult me by pretending this was a momentary lapse. This wasn't love, Sarah. This was selfishness. He moved to the door, his back to the stunned pair. You've both made your choices. Now live with them. As he stepped outside, the crisp night air hit him like a wave, clearing the fog of anger and betrayal. He didn't look back as he walked to his car, but he heard Sarah's voice, faint and desperate, calling his name. Driving away, Jacob felt an unexpected sense of relief. He wasn't leaving his life behind. He was reclaiming it. The betrayal had cut deep, but it also freed him. Sarah and Logan had tried to tarnish the life he'd built, but they had only revealed their own flaws. In the rearview mirror, the beach house faded into the distance, a chapter closed. Ahead, the road stretched out, an open path to something new. As the taillights of Jacob's car disappeared down the coastal road, the silence in the beach house was deafening. Sarah stood frozen in the living room, her gaze fixed on the photographs Jacob had left on the table. Logan fidgeted beside her, his earlier bravado now replaced by unease. Is he serious? Logan muttered, breaking the silence. He can't just lock you out of the house. You're his wife. Sarah's shoulders slumped as she slowly sank into the couch. He can, and he will, she said, her voice hollow. Logan scoffed, trying to mask his own growing discomfort. Well, this is your mess. I'm not sticking around for this. Sarah snapped her head up, anger flashing in her eyes. My mess? You were perfectly fine sneaking around with me when it was convenient. Now that things have gotten complicated, you're running? Logan opened his mouth to respond, but quickly shut it, recognizing the futility of arguing. Without another word, he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Where are you going? Sarah demanded, her voice rising. Logan turned, his hand on the doorknob. Away from this disaster. You should figure out your own life before dragging anyone else into it. With that, he walked out, leaving Sarah alone in the house that now felt cold and uninviting. Meanwhile, Jacob parked his car at a nearby hotel and checked into his room. The stark, impersonal space was a sharp contrast to the warmth of the beach house he had left behind, but it was a refuge. As he set down his bag, he allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability. The confrontation had drained him emotionally, but a strange sense of clarity accompanied the exhaustion. He took out his phone and scrolled through old photos. Images of him and Sarah at the beach house during happier times. They were smiling, carefree, wrapped in a love that now seemed like a distant memory. Jacob felt the ache of loss, but also the quiet resolve that had carried him through the evening. That night, sleep eluded him. Instead, he drafted a list of tasks for the days ahead, contacting his lawyer to finalize the separation, meeting with the locksmith to ensure the house was secure, and reaching out to close friends for support. He didn't plan to wallow in the pain of betrayal. Back at the beach house, Sarah remained in a daze. The reality of her situation began to sink in as she wandered from room to room. Every corner of the house seemed to mock her with memories of Jacob, the laughter they had shared on the deck during sunsets, the quiet mornings spent sipping coffee by the bay windows. She felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her, suffocating and inescapable. Unable to sit still, Sarah picked up her phone and dialed Jacob's number. It rang unanswered until his voicemail picked up. Jacob, she began, her voice trembling. I don't even know what to say. Please, call me, let's talk, I can explain. She stopped, realizing how hollow the words sounded. What could she possibly say to undo the damage? She ended the call abruptly, her heart pounding. By morning, Sarah woke to a flurry of emails and notifications. One caught her attention, a notification from their shared bank. Jacob hadn't been bluffing, her access to the accounts had been revoked. Panic set in as she realized the full extent of what she had lost. Not just her husband's trust, but also the financial stability and comfort she had taken for granted. In the following days, Jacob threw himself into action. He met with his lawyer, who commended him for taking swift, decisive steps. Together, they worked on a plan to expedite the separation process. Jacob also visited the beach house with the locksmith to oversee the final changes. As he stood on the familiar porch, watching the waves crash against the shore, he felt a strange mixture of grief. The neighbors had noticed the commotion. Miss Garrison approached Jacob as he was leaving. Jacob, she said hesitantly, I don't mean to intrude, but, are you all right? He managed a small smile. I will be, Miss Garrison. Thank you for everything. I appreciate you looking out for me. Her expression softened with sympathy. You deserve better, you know. You always have. Jacob nodded, her words reinforcing his resolve. He had spent too long accepting less than he deserved, and now it was time to move forward. For Sarah, the fallout was more profound. The life she had built with Jacob unraveled quickly. Friends they had shared began to distance themselves, unwilling to condone her betrayal. Financial strain forced her to downsize, moving into a modest apartment far from the idyllic beach house. Logan, true to his word, disappeared from her life as quickly as he had entered it. She tried reaching out to him, but her calls went unanswered. For the first time in years, Sarah was truly alone. One night, she sat in her empty apartment, scrolling through her phone. On social media, she saw a post from Jacob. It was a simple photo of him hiking in the mountains, a place they had always talked about visiting but never did. He looked content, at peace. The caption read, "New Horizons." Tears blurred her vision as she stared at the screen. Sarah realized the depth of what she had thrown away. Not just a marriage, but a partnership built on years of love and trust. But regret came too late. Jacob had moved on, and Sarah was left to confront the choices that had led her here. Jacob's life began to take on a new rhythm in the weeks that followed. The sense of betrayal no longer gnawed at him in the same way. Instead, it became a quiet reminder, a scar that marked his resolve to never settle for less than he deserved. One morning, Jacob woke early, the sun just beginning to rise over the city. The world outside his hotel window looked crisp and full of possibility. He had always been an early riser, but for the first time in years, he felt energized not by responsibility, but by freedom. He had spent the last few days hiking trails he'd once only dreamed of visiting, taking photographs, and enjoying the solitude of nature. The escape was as much about rediscovering himself as it was about moving forward. The mountains, with their unyielding presence, reminded him of his strength, a strength he'd forgotten he possessed in the shadow of his fractured marriage. Back in the city, Jacob made a point to reconnect with old friends, something he had neglected during his years of married life. Over coffee and late-night conversations, he found solace in their laughter and support. They didn't pry too much about what had happened, offering instead the kind of quiet companionship that felt like a balm for his wounded spirit. During one such outing, a friend suggested he join a local photography group. "You've always had an eye for beauty," his friend said. "Why not channel it into something new?" Jacob hesitated at first, but curiosity won out. The group met on Saturday mornings, exploring different parts of the city with their cameras in tow. Jacob quickly found himself engrossed in the craft, learning to see the world through a new lens. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a way to reclaim his perspective on life. Meanwhile, Sarah's world continued to unravel. She had moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the beach house she had once called her sanctuary. Her days felt monotonous, the vibrancy of her old life replaced by the stark reality. She avoided social media for the most part, unable to face the carefully curated lives of others, especially Jacob's. When she did allow herself a glimpse, the photos Jacob shared spoke volumes. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. One evening, Sarah came across a photo of Jacob at an art exhibit. He stood in front of one of his own photographs, the caption reading, "A different view, a new beginning." She stared at the image for a long time, the ache in her chest growing. Jacob was moving forward in a way she hadn't anticipated, and the realization stung more than she cared to admit. For Jacob, the exhibit had been a turning point. His photographs, taken during his hikes and city explorations, had caught the attention of the local arts community. The invitation to display his work had been unexpected but deeply fulfilling. Seeing his images framed and admired by others felt like a validation of the journey he'd undertaken, not just in photography, but in life. As he stood in the gallery that night, surrounded by strangers and friends, Jacob felt the weight lift. This wasn't just an ending, it was a transformation. He was no longer defined by what he had lost, but by what he... Months passed, and Jacob's life continued to evolve. He began volunteering at a community center, teaching photography to at-risk youth. The work gave him purpose and joy, seeing the spark of creativity light up in the kids he mentored. On a particularly sunny afternoon, as he was packing up his gear, he bumped into someone new. Lila, a fellow volunteer who ran the center's writing workshops. Her easy smile and sharp wit immediately caught his attention. They talked for hours, discovering a shared love of storytelling, art, and a mutual desire to make a difference. Lila was different from Sarah. She was unpretentious and sincere, her energy rooted in a sense of self-awareness that Jacob found refreshing. They began meeting regularly, their connection growing naturally and without pretense. For Sarah, the echoes of her decisions lingered. She tried reaching out to Jacob once, leaving him a short voicemail, I hope you're doing well. I'm sorry for everything. But Jacob never returned the call. By then, it wasn't out of malice or spite, it simply wasn't necessary. The past was the past, and Jacob was finally free of its weight. As he and Lila sat together one evening, sharing stories and laughter, Jacob realized something profound. Life didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. It could be messy and unpredictable, but still filled with beauty. For the first time in years, Jacob felt truly at peace, ready to embrace whatever came next.